All right, hello, good morning. So, I've got about 45 minutes before our next shift 30 call, and I thought I would spend some more time going through my notes on Focusing-Oriented Psychotherapy by Eugene Gendlin. That sound was me drinking coffee, so don't get weirded out by the slurpy noises. um, so, let me just start a timer. Um, yeah, so what I'll do, as I did last time, is I'll read out the ones that I want to talk about and think about, um, and then I'll riff off of them. So last time I'm pretty sure I finished with this one. So here we go. According to the according to the experiential method, theories are neither true nor false. They are not true because the kind of entities they assert do not actually exist in concrete human experiencing. But they are not simply false because they sometimes enable people to locate experiences they would otherwise have missed. The reality of what it brings out would remain even if we were to dismiss the theory. So I feel like I'm in kind of sketchy territory when I try to riff off Gendlin talking about theory, especially in the context of a community such as Teapot, which is full of such incredibly smart people and very rationalist and theoretical and very analytical people at that. But I'll see what I can do. I mean, the experiential method, to be honest, when I read that again, I was not sure entirely what he's pointing at. If he's just talking about his approach to therapy or his approach in philosophy or something else, I'm not sure. But he is making a contrast between that and something that's not experiential. Theories are neither true nor false because the kinds of entities they assert do not actually exist in concrete human experiencing. So someone asked me today, or not today, recently, about a tweet that I posted, which was inspired by Gendlin. And I think the tweet was, be wary of theories that make your own life or yourself seem impossible. And somebody responded, like, how would a theory do that? They are just abstract, they're not about the concrete details of our life. So it's like, good point. And I think the reason I'm thinking of that is because Gendlin is kind of saying the same thing here, is that theories are not about the specifics. They're not about the tiny details. They are abstract. And so the kind of entities that they assert are conceptual. They're abstract. They're not about the concrete things that we directly experience in our living. So in that way, they're not simply true because they're not about what we encounter directly in our lives. But they're not simply false because they sometimes enable us to locate experiences we otherwise would have missed, right? So a theory can sort of train our perception in a way. It's like a lens, perhaps, or like a way that I've liked to imagine it when I read Gendlin is like as if it's a magnet, and you're like, it's like a magnet, or like if you were at the beach and you had one of those metal detectors and you're just moving the metal detector over the sand, and when you come across something there, you wouldn't know it was there except for the fact that you have the metal detector and it beeps, right? So it's like pointing out, like, oh, here's the thing that you wouldn't have noticed except for through this special way of perceiving. Or with a magnet, Gendlin sometimes uses this thing about like lifting out bits of experience, like felt senses, lifting them out when using theories. Theories allow you to like notice and lift out little corners of experience that you might not otherwise notice, and then once they're lifted out, you can explore those things. So that's how the magnet one is like, you are running a magnet over, a bunch of stuff on a table, and maybe one of those things is attracted to the magnet and it pops up. And now you're like, oh, hey, look at that thing. Let's explore that thing. And now that you have it, you can put the magnet away. You can put the theory away. And you can still explore the thing that the magnet helped you discover. So that's sort of how I understand what he means here. So they're not simply false. It's not about saying, like, is this completely soundproof? Is this logically sound? It's not about debating the theory, proving it to be false, etc. It's about, what does the theory allow me to notice that I might not have noticed before? And that's really it. That's the main question. And then once I've noticed something, I don't need to hold on to the theory. I don't need to be beholden to the theory anymore, but it hasn't allowed me to notice something, and now that detail of lived experience is something that I can explore. And I can let go of the theory, and that doesn't, it's like I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like the baby is the thing that I noticed, and I can throw out the bathwater. No worries. Okay, I'm going to read the next one. When we think of the theory, we think not just of concepts. We think of and feel the experiences. They are never simply what a theory asserts. Experiencing is always more intricate, and it can lead to changes that seem impossible according to the concept. So I'm a little confused, to be honest, like how this first sentence fits in. But let me just kind of try to explain what I understand from this at first, and maybe the sentences will sort themselves out. So with this, it's like what I was talking about in the earlier passage. The details of our actual experience are always more and finer and more intricate than what's contained in the theory, right? The theory is abstract. The abstract is not concerned with the details. The theory is not about every single little thing that you would discover in an experiment. It's about things that you've been able to generalize. So experience is always more intricate than what the theory itself says about reality. In a process model, he has a good little anecdote example where he talks about Newton doing experiments with like gravity and having water in a bucket and winding up that bucket on a rope and letting it spin and watching how the water moves in relation to the bucket. And there were a lot of little details about what was going on in that experiment that he kind of just discounted because they didn't really fit in to the abstraction that he was going for. It's not to say that the abstraction was nonsense, but he didn't account for every little thing that he was noticing. And I can vouch for that because I did that experiment myself. But yeah, so the theory talks about an abstract version of reality, and what you actually experience is full of details that aren't accounted for by the theory. So then this last part that's highlighted, experience is more intricate and it can lead to changes that seem impossible. That's what focusing is about. That's what Gendlin's work is about generally. It's like if you actually hone in on those details, on those intricacies, and explore those, you end up discovering, or you can discover things which seem like they don't fit into any theory at all, or any concept that you already have. And that's, so Gendlin was a professor of philosophy first and foremost, and he says it. He's like, I'm not really a psychologist. I'm a philosopher. And so he has focusing, which is something he developed after working with Carl Rogers, but he also has another version of that process, which is about philosophical work and creating and thinking about concepts and theories, and that's called thinking at the edge. And so, when you explore, whether it's in focusing or thinking at the edge, you find some little detail that doesn't really fit into the larger theory, and then you go into that and you're like, oh, what's that about? Like, where did that come from? Like, what comes from that? You explore that. And then you notice other things, and maybe having taken that step into that little corner of experience that is otherwise inexplicable, then you notice all these other things that you would have never noticed before because you have a new vantage point. And suddenly you're beyond the theory that you were starting from. Suddenly you're beyond the concepts that you already have available to you. Or at least in focusing, you go into that thing that you didn't have words for, and you've discovered that you have words for it, and now you have a new vantage point, and you can, right, having crystallized this thing that was previously just murky and vague, now it's like a thing. And the horizon, the area that's murky and uncertain, has extended even further into the distance, right? It's like you're going towards a horizon, and with every step, the horizon extends further away from you, but with every step, the area around you gets clearer, and you discover new places as you go without ever finally arriving anywhere. That felt like a really terrible articulation, but yeah, so what about this? When we think about the theory, we think not just of concepts, we think of and feel the experiences. I mean, maybe what he's getting at, perhaps, is that when we think of the theory, while the theory is abstract, our actual experience of thinking about the theory always involves sort of filling in the details, filling in the experiences that have allowed us to get to the theory, right? The concrete experiences that have allowed us to abstract, right? Maybe if we think about just gravity, we don't just think about like this pure abstract gravity, but we think about walking around, we think about dropping something, and we think about like these experiences that have showed us this thing called gravity. Okay. Freud's invaluable concepts seem to be about pathological entities from which no change seems to follow. But from the experiences they help us find, we can generate steps of change. I feel like I don't have enough context from what that passage was to really make sense of that, and I also don't have like a ton of background with Freud to speak on this. But it is just pointing to a difference between Gendlin and a lot of other thinkers in psychology. Is Gendlin is coming to it with this philosophical foundation of process. Everything is in process. Change is fundamental. Things are not atomic and static fundamentally. So rather than discovering in ourselves through therapy and related work all these different parts that are just static, right? I think I talked about it in the previous one. We're not just bags of content, for Gendlin anyway, right? We're not just bags of pathological entities that we just discover and then that's what we are. The process of discovering them also changes them, and we change as we go through that process, and there's no end to it. Like I said, that constant process of clarifying what is currently unclear changes us, and we gain more clarity about ourselves and our experiences, and yet we continue to have, what's Gendlin's language for this? There are always next steps. There's always further implication. There's always that murky edge. And we don't always have to go there, but it's always there if we are sensitive enough to notice it. Because that's how life works in Gendlin's philosophy. Life is process. Life is always moving. And if you're stuck, right, in a process model, life ends when the process ends. If the process completely ends, that's the end of life. We can employ all theories. They may contradict each other, but the concrete experiences they help us find do not. Experiences do not contradict each other. If we let theories, concepts, and words refer to concrete experiences, each can help at times. I mean, I don't think he's saying a ton more than what I've already talked about in the other one. But I mean, the extra part here is that experiences don't contradict each other, right? Theories may operate on premises that, logically aren't compatible. And so then you get into this trap of being like, is this theory right or is this theory right? And proving it one way or another. But then you're just trying to prove abstract generalities. Experiences themselves, like the concrete things that we notice, I'm trying to think, like, I don't want to just take him for granted here. But our concrete experiences, they are what they are. You have them. You experienced whatever you experienced. Maybe the next day you have an experience which seems like the opposite, but that doesn't mean you didn't have the experience you had yesterday. right? And like I was saying before, the theories and the concepts allow us to have a particular way of perceiving, a particular way of seeing, right? If we think about gravity, if we know about gravity, if we're working with that, for example, then we can like notice things or like conceptualize what's going on when I drop this thing, this notepad, right? So we can see it in a new way, and then we can think about the details of that thing that we're seeing in a new way within the scope of this theory, right? But then maybe we notice something within that experience that's like, oh, how's that working? Like, oh, but it bounced. Why did that happen? Whatever, I don't know. Or fucking buoyancy, right? In water. It's like, okay, we have gravity, but then we have buoyancy. Like, so how does that work? Things are supposed to be like going down, but then it floats. Why does that work? Right? So the theories may not obviously be compatible, but clearly this thing is not sinking. So what's that about? That is a concrete experience, and then we have to investigate what the fuck's that? What's going on there? And then we learn new things. Okay. How much time is there left? 8 minutes. All right, so I think, so the rest is just descriptions of what the rest of the book is about. Maybe it would be interesting to just read that real quick. Just to give, if someone is watching this, and to remind myself like what the rest of the book tackles. So, chapter 2 is a consideration of clients who are not moving in therapy, a major concern of this book. Some only talk and do not enter into anything. Others have intense but repetitious emotions, even large cosmic experiences, but without a therapeutic process. Of course, the process must arise from inside. No therapist or anyone else can make it happen. But we now know how to issue the small and unobtrusive but very specific instructions that engender focusing. That's a huge point, really. Like, the process must come from the inside. The therapist can't make it happen. And I do think it's like sometimes I forget this because I'm so Gendlin oriented, focused, whatever. But that, like, a lot of people do go to the therapist with this idea that the therapist is going to solve shit for them, as if they can, like, snap their fingers and give them a pill and it'll just solve. I mean, that's another whole topic, is like the way in which professionals in the mental health world are positioned as doctors and surgeons and people who just come in and do a thing to you and fix you. But it's not really how it works. I mean, in some cases, maybe it works a little bit more like that, but I think it leads a lot of people to go to therapists expecting the therapist to just like give them the answers and to just solve their problems without being a part of that process and a part of that relationship themselves. Okay. Chapter 3 gives 8 recognizable characteristics of the small bits of therapeutic movement that typically arise from focusing. So that would be a good one, I think, because especially within the scope of doing shift 30, people are asking, like, one, how do you notice or begin to be more sensitive to your felt sense? And how do you know when you've experienced a felt shift, what is a felt shift? And so I think this chapter would be especially helpful in explaining that even further. Like, what are these characteristics of therapeutic movement, of shifts? Okay. In chapters 4 and 5, each response in a transcript is examined to show where a small step of therapeutic movement happens, just what the client did to bring it about, and what the therapist did to help it happen. I also discuss the aspect of the client's communication to which the therapist responded, and exactly how the response enabled the client to enter further into direct experience. This kind of direct experiencing can be clearly distinguished from repetition of the same feelings and emotions as before. It becomes clear just what sort of experiencing can bring something new and therapeutic. The examination of each response shows where the therapist's responses succeeded and where they fail. I don't know if I will read that part. It's kind of weird to read a transcript with notes in a context like a video of this nature. Okay. In chapter 6, focusing is distinguished from other kinds of physical sensations, emotions, imagery, anxiety, hypnosis, meditation, Jung's 4 functions, altered states. These distinctions will help. Otherwise, if one does not know focusing, one may assume that it is one of these other kinds of experience. Chapter 7 takes up focusing as such. Chapter 8 presents 10 excerpts in which focusing is being taught didactically, not to clients. Such teaching is not often useful in therapy, but it lets the reader observe focusing being more swiftly grasped. That seems helpful too. Just to explain what the heck focusing is. Chapter 9 takes up certain difficulties in the teaching of focusing. Chapter 10 consists of excerpts from a single case. Again, probably not something that I would want to read on a video like this. Part 2 of this book shows how other therapeutic approaches can and need to be adapted and modified so that they can be used in relation to the conscious-unconscious zone from which new steps arise. Each makes a unique contribution, but how can one determine what it is that is unique in each? So in each being different approaches to therapy. So that's where it gets really interesting, talking about different methods, right? I don't recall if he specifically talks about like CBT, but he talks about dream work, he talks about cognitive approaches, he talks about like strictly somatic approaches to therapy, and how bringing in the felt sense can help each of those, and what is unique about each of those, and what it does that others don't do. So that's a really interesting part of the book. Okay. In chapter 11, I present a new way to understand and organize the variety of therapeutic methods by avenues. That is to say, by whether it is cognitions, emotions, or dreams that are employed as an avenue of therapy, or whether it is role play, actions as in behavior therapy, or bodily energy, imagery, values, superego messages, or client-therapist interactional events. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I remember now he talks about exposure therapy, for example, and how, that can work, but it can work even better if you're bringing in this stuff from focusing and felt sense. Chapters 12 through 22 each take up one avenue of therapy, show how we can determine what is uniquely valuable in each, and exactly how the inclusion of focusing can enhance each method without changing it very much. More importantly, I describe how each can be modified as a part of focusing-oriented therapy, so that, for example, images, role play, and action steps arise from the edge of experience and also lead to a new or a renewed entry into the edge of experience. Therapy, I argue, does not consist mainly of the familiar, already defined kinds of experience, whether dreams or emotions, actions or images. Therapy is rather a process that centrally involves experience before it becomes one of these defined packages, and again afterward when it dips back into the prepackaged zone at the edge of consciousness. Okay, I'll just read this final bit. In chapter 23, I discuss the aspects of the relationship and the presence of the therapist, which are crucial at all times throughout therapy. I then take up the occasional relational events and difficulties that provide valuable opportunities for therapeutic steps on the interactional avenue. The reader is advised to read all of part 1 in order as well. Working on one avenue involves the others because of their connection through the center point of focusing. All types of therapist responses can be attempted without ever imposing anything on a client and without obstructing the client's sense of ownership and active use of the hour. Whatever actually arises in the client is pursued, and anything else is quickly discarded, at least for the time being. That certainly includes focusing instructions and any other therapist agenda. Remaining consistent with this principle permits the therapist to employ a great variety of kinds of responses, remaking each kind in a specific manner that enables it to contribute to the inwardly arising therapeutic process. Okay, so that was part 2 of going through my notes on this book. Let me just highlight this to know where I want to begin. Okay, cool. Well, catch you next time. Have a great day.